Guys, this is Jared here. I wanted to show you how I connected securely to AWS DynamoDB from the AWS Mobile SDK for Unity. Um, it was something that I struggled with for a while. So if you use the AWS Mobile SDK for Unity, you get very cool objects like Amazon DynamoDB client, but they all require an AWS credentials parameter. And you don't want to use secret keys in your compile code. You want to use Cognito, but I wanted to use Cognito and the hosted web UI, which Cognito, AWS Cognito allows you to do. But all the examples that I saw were people who created their own, UI for sign in, sign up, reset password. I wanted to use the hosted web UI. Um, so what I did for this example, this is a Infinity PBR asset. This is really cool. You can fully customize this. This is the main character. I just took a subset of hairs and outfits, right? Um, do different outfits. You can do female, and so I just took one, two, six, three outfits, three hairs, and male and female, and I'm going to try to save them to DynamoDB. So the first step is getting the mobile SDK for Unity, which you probably already have. Once you download that, you need to import the asset, and it creates an AWS SDK folder under your assets. From there, in order to use it, you need to create at least one game object. So for me, I did Database Manager. And in the start function, you need to hook it up. So you basically just say Unity initializer dot attach to game object and then this dot game object. That's just required by the AWS SDK. This second line here is because I was getting some kind of weird error when I was trying to post. Because I'll explain in a minute how you have to post to the token endpoints. So this was the workaround was to add this HTTP client Unity web request. So let's start in AWS. We go to Cognito, and you have user pools and identity pools. Now, I'm not an expert by any means, but from what I can gather, user pools is basically like your database of users. You have your usernames, passwords, uh, data that you capture, such as email, phone number, etc. And then your identity pool is basically once the user authenticates, they get assigned something out of the identity pool, which allows them access. They get a role basically from your identity pool that allows them access to whatever you policy you have attached to that role. So we want to start with user pools. So I created a user pool. Um, so these are my users. Um, you have all different options. The key thing to note under attributes is that you cannot change it once the user pool is created. You got to make a new one. So I'm storing email. I'm allowing them to sign in with their email address or their username. Um, you can set the password policies. You can set do they have to use MFA? How do they retrieve their password? All kinds of things. I have it set to um, validate their email. So in order before their login will work, they have to click a link in an email, and you can customize the text there. You can have them click a link. You can have them enter a code. Um, but the main thing you want to set up are your app clients, right? So your app clients are um, your basically your apps that need to authenticate. Every client has an ID. The app secret, if you choose to create one, you have to send that with every call. And it's a little bit insecure, I would say, to store the app client secret in your compiled code. So I use something called PKCE. I think, yeah, this guy, PKCE. So basically, it's just another level of encryption. So it's really, really secure, but you don't want to set up the client secret. So you have no client secret, refresh token. Then What you do under app client settings, this is how it all works. I have my Cognito user pool. You can add different identities like Facebook, Google. We're just going to use Amazon. You have to assign a custom callback and sign out URL. So this here is called the scheme. So you normally have HTTP colon slash slash. This is something that you define. It could be anything like JDog colon slash slash. On the desktop, it's not going to work, but on the mobile phone, the way that the mobile phone communicates with other apps is when the mobile browser, whether it's Safari or Chrome, sees that custom scheme, it will check if any apps know how to read that custom scheme. So that's a way that you can force it to open an app and receive some data. So since we're using this, which is called the hosted UI, we have to uh, we have to have a custom scheme. This hosted UI basically allows a user to sign up or sign in, allows them to ask for help if they forgot their password. All this stuff is built for you. So that's why I wanted to use it. However, it is a little bit difficult, at least for me, according to the documentation. So that's why I'm making this video. So we're using the authorization code grants. Basically, you want to give it a callback URL, make up a scheme. Then you want to use the authorization code grant. What that does is um, when it when the user uses this hosted UI, logs in, they don't get back a token. They get back a code in the request string, right? Then they have to take that code and send that back for another call to get the actual OAuth token. So the token is never exposed to the user because we're going out to the mobile browser, then we're going back to the mobile app. You don't want to expose the token to anybody. And definitely don't want to save it in player prefs because people can read that. So once you do your setup here, you have to give it a domain name, which is basically whatever you pick as long as it's open. .auth, .region, .amazoncognito.com. You can also use your own custom domain name. So once you set this up, you're going to be given an app client ID. That is something that you need for the code. So back here, your domain, which we just saw in app client settings, your user pool ID, which is your user pool ID is your main user pool ID, this guy, and then you need your app client. So I have two. I have Dev and Prod, but you would probably just have one. Your app client ID. Now, first step is here I'm using something called Remote Config. It's a plugin for Unity which allows you to switch between Dev and Prod. Here it is, Remote Config. So I can change the user pools and the table name and stuff like that in Dev and Prod. But anyway, the first step will be to shell out to that hosted UI. So I'm just going to do a simple, let me see, I think it's called attempt login. Ready for login attempt. Begin login. So here we build the hosted UI URL and we do a simple application.open URL. So what that's going to do is open the hosted UI. I have that as an event of this login button. So these buttons are disabled until we get the token. So when I click that, it calls the application.open URL. User can now interact with the hosted UI. They can reset their password, they can sign up as a new user, they can log in. Once they log in, you see now it goes to that custom scheme. That's why Safari says you can't open it. On the mobile browser though, we're gonna register that custom scheme so that the mobile app will automatically open, or a pop-up will say, do you want to open this in whatever app. This code is what we need to now pass back to Cognito to get the OAuth token. So in order to register a custom scheme, you have to do something tricky in Xcode or Android Studio, but the good thing about Unity is that you want to write one code base and compile it once. So I found this asset that was really awesome. Let me see if I can I think I had it open. Universal Deep Link from Imagination Overflow. This allows you to register a custom URL in Unity, and it handles all of the config that it has to do in Android or iPhone. So since it won't work on the desktop, they give you this little debug window where you can basically paste in the return back from the hosted UI, and it will call this callback, which is the universal. Let's see, we set it up in start. Instant link activated. So after my application.openURL completes, and it calls my custom scheme and says, hey, do you want to open it in the mobile app? Then we go back into my mobile app, and this is where we enter. So I need to parse the query string for that code because I don't have a OAuth token yet. I only have this code. This is the authorization code grant workflow. So I need to parse out that code from the query string. Then I need to do another post to the, let me see where this is, OAuth 2 token endpoint. And that is, let me show you here, this token endpoint. So once I get the code, I do another post to this token endpoint using authorization code, and this guy is going to give me back an access token. So I'm doing just a simple www form. I add the fields. Code verifier. Code is what I pulled out of the query string. Code verifier is something that I'm using for my PKCE. So code verifier is something that I set when I did the application.openURL. And let me show you that. Okay, see this code challenge? When I append that to my Cognito to the hosted web UI, it I created that with this little utility, this little function, I mean, which I got from reading the token endpoint, which I'll post in the article. Um, and then he's going to send me back that code challenge, and I need, let me see where, code verifier. So here, I generate the code verifier, right? I append in the initial call the code challenge, which is created here. And then he sends me back the code verifier, and I have to send that code verifier for my second call. So that's what this is. Redirect URI is the custom scheme, my custom page. Okay, I send that request, I wait for it to finish. Now I get the ID token, I get the access token, I get the refresh token. But I still don't have the username or the user email. If I want to do that, I need to make another call out to OAuth to user info endpoint, which is right here, user info. And this will give me all those properties that I set up in Cognito, which for me was just username and email. Once I got that, now I'm really cooking. I now have everything I need to build the AWS credentials, which I pass into all these Unity mobile objects. I create, this was the part that really gave me a lot of trouble. adding the credential. I need to add the Cognito IDP and then slash my user pool ID and then the token which I just got from the authorization endpoint. Once I create an object with that, I create the credentials object and then I add that login. Now I can pass this credentials object into any of these Unity SDK objects. And so you'll see here, I create the DynamoDB client, I pass in that object, and now I can call things like load table async. I can do whatever I've given myself permission to. And where you give yourself permission is over in the identity pool. So now once I get the identity, you'll see they have, let me edit this for you. They have your unauthenticated role and your authenticated role. Your unauthenticated role usually can't do anything. What do you want them to be able to do if they don't sign in at all? I don't want them to be able to touch anything until they sign in. So this role pretty much does nothing. Authenticated role is what I allow them access to once they authenticate. So for me, it's that one DynamoDB table where we save those properties. Um, you also need to, let me see where it is. Here, authentication provider, since we're using Cognito user pools, you need to copy your user pool ID and your app client ID from user pools. So everything starts with a user pool. Then once you have that, you can create the identity pool. Let me show you my DynamoDB. Table, we were in dev. So you can see I was able to store those enums for the outfit, the hair, and the last update date. That's about it. I'll post the code for a database manager. The PKCE is what really also confused me. That I want to see if I have that article. I think it is. Here it is. Authorization code grant is what we're using. Now, the other thing they suggest is to make sure that you don't use an integrated web browser, that you use the mobile devices web browser. So you have to do an application.openurl and then you have to have this custom scheme. I guess that's just so the user feels safe that they're using a standard browser and you're not spying or anything. All right, well, that's about it. I'll post the code for Database Manager. I'll post some of the links to the stuff that tripped me up. But once you follow, basically it's two calls. You application open URL, then you call authorization endpoint to transfer that code to a token. And then you can also call user info to get the user info. And then once you have your ID token, you create a Cognito AWS credentials object. You add the login for your custom scheme, and then that object is what you now pass to all of the objects for the Unity Mobile SDK. All right, more to come. Bye.